Welcome to the summit. What is the wisdom of silence? And I can now introduce you to Matthew Fox. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Susan. Good to be with you.
Well, thank you for being here. And you have a PhD in spiritual theology, you're a lecturer, you hold retreats, you're an activist priest, and you're also an author of 38 books. And we are going to be talking about your newest book, and you have it right there to show.
Julian of Norwich, Wisdom in a Time of Pandemic and Beyond. Because Julian lived through the worst pandemic in Europe, the bubonic plague in the 14th century. She was 7 years old when it struck for the first time, and her entire life it kept coming back in waves. Of course, they had no science, no vaccines or promises of vaccines in her day. So it was really extremely ominous and scary. Between 1 out of 3 and 1 out of 2 people died in the plague. And the death happened within 3 or 4 days of getting the virus, the infection. And people freaked out. There were teams of men who went around flagellating themselves from village to village because they felt the cause of the plague was their sins. And this became such a popular practice that the Pope had to intervene and say, no, chill, whatever you're doing, this isn't going to get rid of the plague. So a lot of craziness. And then there was scapegoating, which is going on today too, scapegoating of Jews and of so-called heretics. And in fact, the anti-Semitism rose so much in England, where Julian lived in Norwich, that many Jews fled England to the continent. Not because there was no pandemic on the continent, but because there was less anti-Semitism. So in the midst of this severity, Julian, first of all, she had a near-death experience, and then she had these visions based on that experience, and she saw the crucified Christ, and she says, oh, that Christ stands for the suffering of all of us. And Mirabai Starr, who is a mystic in our time and has written well about the mystics, she translated Julian's book, and she's convinced that Julian lost a child and a husband in the plague. But at the age of 30, she had this near-death experience that resulted in many visions, and she wrote a book. It was the first book ever written by a woman in English. And it begins with her first vision of Christ suffering, but as she says, this is about everyone's suffering. And but then her whole theology is not based on suffering, it's based on not denying the suffering, number one, which is a lesson for today, because we know there are lots of people in denial still about the coronavirus plague. But she also goes on, develops a whole theology of the goodness of nature and how God is the goodness in nature and the goodness in things. And this is what we should be focusing on, she says. And she certainly welcomes your theme of silence and being still, which of course is the part of the mystical journey that all mystics are aware of. Meister Eckhart, who came just before Julian, says that nothing in all creation is so like God as silence. But neither Eckhart nor Julian sit on the silence, if you will. Julian herself became an anchoress, which means she was literally bricked up adjacent to a church, and she had her own cell there. And you can visit that cell today, and which I have. And but her cell had one window looking into the sanctuary of the church to attend the worship services there, but another window went to the outdoors, to the outside. And as it turned out, her cell, her church, was just a few blocks up from a river. And so you have to imagine that sailors, half of them drunk probably, maybe 3/4, would stop by her window and get counseling. And many other people came to her for counseling. So she was not just a recluse or a pure contemplative, she was also serving the people, and was very open to the not just to the sailors, but to anyone else who came to her for spiritual direction or advice. So, and then of course, as I said, she was writing this book her whole life. She wrote like 3 versions of it. But of course, because she was a woman, the book wasn't published for 300 years, which to me is a long time to wait for your first book review. And but another reason she wasn't published was because the pandemic made people so afraid of nature. Up till then, you had many Christian mystics celebrating how the experiences in nature are the experiences of God. You have this in Hildegard of Bingen 200 years earlier, then Francis of Assisi, who came right after Hildegard, Thomas Aquinas, Matilda Magdeburg, and Meister Eckhart. All of them were celebrating divinity in nature. And Julian does that too. But Thomas Berry, the great geologian, he says that the pandemic, bubonic plague, killed creation spirituality in the West. So after the 14th century, Hildegard century, religion became all about redemption and fear of hell. And this is what you get in the Reformation, really a century later, and in the Catholic Church's response to the Reformation, the Council of Trent. Doesn't say anything about creation. It's all about, are we saved by our grace, or by our works, and all this big fights between the Protestants and Catholic. And right up today, most preachers talk about sin before they talk about, if at all, about the blessing that nature is. And this is what makes Julian so special, that she's listened deeply. And she has, for example, the cover of the book here, which is the original paintings back here, it tells a story of one of her visions, which was one day she saw in the palm of her hand a round ball the size of a hazelnut, and it was glowing. And she said, "What is this?" And the answer was, "This is everything that is created." In other words, the whole universe was in her hand as a small ball. And she said, "But it's so fragile, it could easily fall apart." And the answer she got was, "It is all kept together by love. Love keeps it together." So that was her basic message, that the whole universe is kept together by love. Yes, there's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. There are pandemics and there are wars and all the rest, but ultimately what keeps it together is love. And I think she learned that from silence, from listening deeply, and we're better for it because we now have access to her, and we can understand her better, I think, than they could in the 14th century, because now we're finally beginning to listen to women, for one thing. But also the sacredness of creation is what she's writing about, and clearly that's at the forefront of our survival and of the whole issues of climate change, and even the coronavirus, which in many ways has been brought about by our divorce from the sacredness of nature.
Yeah, and I know that she wrote, "Nature is grace and grace is nature." So it's like non-dual, it's one of the same.
Exactly. She was, that's talking of nature, that's my dog. She just entered the room here. Hello, Mara. So, yes, non-dualism, that's very important to her. And as part of her deconstructing patriarchy, you see, I think that and her big development of God as mother, those two things, because Rosemary Ruther, the great feminist Catholic theologian, she says that the basis, the foundation of dualism, of patriarchy, is dualism. The idea that matter and spirit is at war with each other, or that body and soul are. And of course, you get that from dualists like St. Augustine and others who are deeply influenced by Plato. But Julian rejects that. She says, and this is a quote, "God is in our sensuality." And she says that our God has created our body and soul as a glorious union of body and soul. So this is very much in the tradition of Eckhart, and who said, well, Augustine said the soul makes war with the body. Augustine said the soul loves the body. So those are two different ways of seeing the world. And clearly Julian is in Eckhart's lineage. That is the creation spirituality lineage. So she's very much celebrating the divine feminine. And when she talks about the motherhood of God, it's interesting because she is a Christian. She talks about the Trinity. And she takes it apart and says, God, the creator, is mother and father. She says, God is delighted to be our father, and God is delighted to be our mother. But then she talks about the second person of Christ, and she says, Christ is our mother. Because if you really look at what Jesus is teaching and what he's busy about, healing, this is the work of compassion. And compassion is the primary work of motherhood, she says. She says the mother is near, the service of the mother is nearest and surest and readiest, she says, and that service ultimately is compassion. And of course, the word compassion in both Hebrew and Arabic comes from the word for womb. So she's celebrating the mammal brain, the motherhood of mammals with wombs. And the whole Jewish tradition is doing that in honoring compassion. And so on these two foundations, that of non-dualism and of the motherhood of God, Julian is clearly coming forth with a women's theology and a feminist theology. And that's a big reason why she was ignored. And even when her book was translated in the 17th century and published, printed, few people read it, because by then the West was so patriarchal. Here we had sent all these ships with the military in them to the New Worlds, to the Americas, but also to the Pacific Islands and all, but also, of course, to Africa to get slaves. All this imperial energy, which is so thoroughly reptilian brain, so thoroughly patriarchal, that when she came along in the 17th century saying, in effect, that all of creation is sacred and everything, it was too late. We had already beaten up and committed genocide against all these indigenous people, to whom religion was essentially about aboriginal mother love, as one scholar has put it, that the love of nature is at the heart, and finding God in nature is at the heart of indigenous religions. And the Europeans didn't stop to ask about that, because all they asked about, are you saved? Are you saved? And they weren't in the Christian sense of the word. They'd never heard of Christ, so they got slaughtered. So Julian was out of sync with the energy of the 17th century, that was very dualistic, and that was a separation of science and religion too, which is to say the universe versus the human soul. They became separated in the 17th century. Science split from religion, and because religion was so dangerous, the century began, year 1600, with the church, Catholic Church, burning Giordano Bruno at the stake. First, they tortured him and cut out his tongue. And why did they burn him? Because he was trying to bring Copernicus' idea of the universe, the science, the new science, into the Christian faith, like his brother Dominican Aquinas had done 2 centuries earlier with Aristotle. But this was too much for the Inquisition of the time. And so they burned him very ceremoniously and publicly in the square in Rome in the year 1600, the Jubilee year. And so this freaked out the scientists that, hey, these believers can be a little dangerous. Let's work a truce. Why don't you believers take the soul and we'll take the universe? And that's what happened. We've had a schizophrenic civilization ever since, where science has uncovered the powers of the universe, and religion has become more and more introspective and out of touch, really, with the real moral issues of the day. But this is now what we're moving beyond in our 21st century science and hopefully religion. That's what creative spirituality is about. You know, the Bible begins with Genesis. It doesn't say a word about sin. Genesis 1 first chapter, not a word about sin. It's cosmology. It's a version of how the sun came to be and the moon came to be and the animals and the plants. And then at the very end, just like today's science story, at the very end comes the human. And it's all called at the very end, very beautiful and very good. That's how the Bible begins. It's amazing to me that for centuries, most preachers begin with sin when sin isn't even mentioned. It's not the beginning of the Bible at all. The goodness of creation and the beauty of creation is what's emphasized in Genesis 1. So Julian knew this, and all the creation mystics knew this. But even there, you have to be still, as you say, to take in the beauty and the gratuity and a gift that our existence is. And of course, at a time like pandemic like ours, people are forced to be quieter, unless you've got kids running around at home and they can't go to school, then that really makes things more difficult. But many other people have experienced more solitude, those without young children, perhaps, in this time pandemic. And I think people are asking deeper questions about what is life about and what is my work about if I get it back. And, why are we here? So these are all the deep questions that come up in a time of silence, even enforced silence or solitude, like a pandemic is.
Yeah. And so there is some wisdom that we all have, like you mentioned also nature, creation, spirituality, and the human nature is part of nature. And we have that intuition, we have that wisdom. And so when we are silent, we can kind of feel into that, sense into that, listen to that. And that's probably also what Julian of Norwich did. She listened deeply, and she had these showings and visions, and from that place, and then she was acting out in the world, love in action, you could say, from that place. And so it's the silence within us that is so wise. And of course, knowledge about the world and how to get about in the world and improve life and go through suffering and such. We also need some knowledge, but it's like we overlook the innate wisdom that we are, because we don't sit in silence with ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's what the mystics did a lot, right?
Yes, and wisdom is feminine, remember, in the Bible. Wisdom is a she. And she was, according to Proverbs, present with God at the creation of the world and playing with God. And wisdom has to do with play. Contemplation has to do with play. In fact, Thomas Aquinas says the nearest word to contemplation is play. It's playing with wisdom. And but knowledge is more masculine, and it's more about it's about power, really. What you know, knowledge is power. But wisdom embraces knowledge. It's not afraid of knowledge. It's not anti-intellectual. In fact, Hildegard of Bingen, the great saint, said that she put it, wisdom is present in all creative works, but she says all knowledge comes from God. So there's not anti-intellectualism there, but what there is a recognition that the bigger questions of life come from the heart, not from the head. And they are questions about why we're here and what is our proper behavior and how do we get along with Mother Earth, with the other creatures, with future generations. And these are the questions of wisdom. What is our proper behavior? And this is at the essence, I think, of healthy spirituality and healthy religion. And whereas religion can easily be manipulated by powers and projections that humans carry within us, and societies do, institutions do. So this is why critics, the prophets, whether Jesus or Isaiah or the Buddha and others, come along, Martin Luther King Jr. and Dorothy Day and others, to wake us up to whether we're really living these values that wisdom teaches us. And there's this beautiful phrase in the scriptures that Julian picks up on, that Aquinas picks up on, about wisdom is a house of our heart. Wisdom wants to set up her tent in the house of our heart. And I think that's very beautiful language. And Hildegard even drew a picture of it, a painting of it, and put it to music, of course, because she was an amazing artist and musician. But yeah, these are the deeper questions that the via negativa of the mystics is learning to be still, to listen to wisdom, as you say. Wisdom is within us, but she's also walking the streets. She sits at the gates of the town, the scriptures say. So she's ordinary. She's available to everybody if we can enter into that silence that we all carry within us. That you don't need a PhD for wisdom. That would be nice if our academic institutions provided more teaching about wisdom and not just about knowledge, because they're part of the problem if they're just teaching knowledge and not wisdom. Because it's wisdom where the values come forward and the courage to stand up and live your values, even if it means that you pay a price for that.
Yeah, because it's like when we listen to that wisdom, it really feels like love, right? It's like this curious, wonder, and it's love, and so it's like coming back to that all the time. Mm-hmm. That's like a refuge, you could say.
A refuge.
Yeah.
Julian says that wisdom is the mother of all good things. And in many ways, her entire theology, because it's so much constructed on the divine feminine and the mother and wisdom, it's all really built around that theme, that the wisdom is present everywhere, but we have to take her in. We have to be receptive. And that's what contemplation is. And that's what deep listening is. And that's a deep part of our getting into our own nobility and our own empowerment and our own responsibility to make a difference and to live by our values and not by, in the values of wisdom, and not by necessarily by the values of those who are shouting the loudest or have the most power. So, and then, of course, in the Christian tradition, Jesus is considered the teacher of wisdom, but even wisdom incarnate, that Jesus is often called the presence of wisdom among us. And it's interesting because he was a man, and wisdom in Judaism is feminine, chokmah, or in Greek too, Sophia is feminine. But that's the irony of it. But wisdom in the Christian tradition becomes incarnate in a human being, okay, but in a male human being, that's a shock. But that's kind of a inclusive thing, because it's showing that not just the divine feminine, but the sacred masculine is meant to be incarnated as wisdom. So wisdom then is not something owned by the feminine. It's meant to cut across the very meaning of both the divine feminine and the sacred masculine. And if we had a society based on that, our education would be very different. And the results would be that our politics, our economics, our religions, our media, all of it would be very different, because it would be infused with both feminine and masculine energies. And we would have a happier, a more joyful society. That's another theme and value that Julian pushes. She says that joy is our birthright as human beings. Joy is our birthright. And of course, love and joy go together, as do goodness and love and joy. After all, love is a response to goodness. And Hildegard, or Julian, is saying that goodness is at the heart of all nature and at the heart of the Godhead. So you have that kind of a trinity: goodness, love, wisdom, and also joy. Joy is a result of love.
Yeah, and also peace, right? I have a quote here that I wrote down. We will never be blissfully liberated until we are at peace and love, for that is our liberation. So it's also that deep peace.
Yes. Yeah, that definitely goes with the process of contemplation. Here's another quote from Julian that I really love. She says, charged with the quality of reverence and loving awe, we turn ourselves with all our might toward the actions to which we are guided. Now, I just love that word charged. And of course, she was using that word. She invented a lot of English words. One of them was enjoy. She used that word for the first time. She got it from a French word. But she used the word charge 700 years before electricity. You know, I think we know the meaning of charge, you might say, in a deeper way, maybe a more everyday way than Julian did. But she chose that word. We are charged with the quality of reverence and loving awe, and we turn ourselves with all our might toward the actions to which we are guided. So I just love that, the idea that the giftedness of existence charges us with awe, with reverence, and with loving awe, to go to work, you know, to serve others, to be compassionate. So yeah, she's just full of wisdom like that. And it didn't come cheap. She didn't get it in a book. She suffered along with everyone else during the pandemic, but she listened deeply even to the suffering. And she wasn't projecting, as I said, the cause of the suffering onto others, such as Jews or heretics or what have you. And she wasn't running from it. She wasn't in denial like so many are today. And not just about the pandemic, but about climate change. Look at all the suffering that the climate change is already unleashing against so many creatures, not just humans, but the rising of the seas, the heat, the wildfires, the floods, the hurricanes. I mean, all of it is really coming home to roost. And so her advice is, and this is wisdom, first of all, don't go into denial. It's an obvious temptation because it's easier to go into denial. One way we go into denial is through addictions. You know, drinking can be a denial, cover up of your deep feelings of suffering or fear. And don't do that, but do go into deepening the love of creation, your love of your existence and that of others. And that's the way to move. And I just think this is very practical, and that she's so timely for our time in history. Maybe that's why she was ignored for 700 years, because we weren't ready for her yet. And especially bringing forth those feminine values of listening and contemplation.
Yeah. And she also talks about trust, like the trust and the courage. And that is in the heart, right? That in the goodness, that it is love, that everything is made of love. And although it may not look like it always, then it is. And you just got to keep trusting that and act from that and not go into despair. And if you do, come back to your heart and your wisdom and the trust, and because it does feel like we are made of something really strong, right? It does feel like just existence in itself is strong.
Exactly. We've gotten this far, our species has. And trust is so important, a word for her. And she says, here is her definition of faith. She says, faith is our trust that all things are in God and God is in all things, which is exactly what is meant by panentheism, God in all things and all things in God, which is the mystical way of seeing the world and our relationship to the divine. The divinity is not up out there someplace. Divinity is pulsating through all things. It's like fish in water. The water is in the fish and the fish is in the water. So it is with grace and with divinity. So really, trust is the primary meaning of faith. Unfortunately, due to patriarchal thinking, the word faith has come to mean a pile of doctrines or something. But that's not what it means in the Gospels. The word for for used for faith, pistuane or pistis, really means trust. When Jesus says, go your way, your blank has healed you, the word is trust. Your trust has healed you. Now, we translate that as faith, but it's really not accurate. And Julian is getting back to the real meaning of living deeply and the real meaning of Jesus' teachings in the gospel, that trust, as you say, is intrinsic to love and to knowing that there's goodness and love that hold the universe together, and we're part of that great history and milieu, that context in which we all live. It's interesting to me. I was talking to a scientist about a month ago, and he was saying, we're discovering all these hominids, these other two-legged creatures that are our ancestors beginning 4 million years ago. And, we have names for some, Neanderthal and the Deversons and the Homo erectus and all this. But he said, the bottom line is they're all gone. They're all extinct. We're the last ones standing. We Homo sapiens are the last hominids standing. You might say, hey, the odds aren't too good because all of our cousins have died off. And we're acting so foolish today with bringing about climate change and a lot of people denying what we're doing. And on the one hand, and then our wars and our nuclear weapons and all this crazy stuff we indulge in. And yet, it's amazing how many efforts there have been by our ancestors to survive, and they weren't able to. And we Homo sapiens, we've had a lot of success, if you will, in many areas. But right now, we're really challenging our survival. We're really facing extinction, just as we're seeing so many millions of other creatures going extinct at this time. So, it's really a time for all people on deck. And for facing these deeper questions you're asking about, what is it that makes us really human? And why do we deserve to survive? And of course, the great teachers, whether Buddha or Lao Tzu or Isaiah or Muhammad or Jesus, Black Elk, so many others, Buddha have said, well, for humans to live well, you have to put forward your powers of compassion to yourself and to others. And we're capable of it. Obviously, there's an agreement on this, that we're all capable of compassion. But to bring that about, a lot of things have to change. And one thing is to do what you're talking about, to spend more time with that silence, because that calms the reptilian brain. When the reptilian brain is not domesticated, when it's not tamed, it just wants to run wild. It's our oldest brain, after all, and it thinks it owns the planet, and it's what counts is that one person standing, that there be one winner and everyone else is a loser. So that kind of, we're still tempted to that. That's what the authoritarianism is about today in the world. That the shortcut, it seems, for some is to put an authoritarian in power and let that person make all the decisions. But that won't do. We're more complex than that. And we have to get to what we really are in our essence, as you say. And that is that we are a being. We are animals capable of love and forgiveness and learning and wisdom, as well as knowledge. And now is the time for the wisdom to kick in. And that includes the divine feminine. And we have to bring a balance back, because the masculine by itself just goes the way of a reptilian brain. That's been proven. And we have to bring that balance back. And that's why Julian is such a wonderful guide for our times.
Yeah. And then when we really sit with ourselves also and look into our soul, like really look deeply, and we are honest with ourselves, we also heal. It's like we are healing all the wounds that we've collected throughout our lifetime. And it's in that healing, it's like that healing also goes outwards in the world, and then we can fully function and be creative from a different place than if we're acting from a wounded place. We are acting from a place that's healed and whole within ourselves, and that will show in the outer world too.
Definitely. And exactly, to center ourselves and operate from that inward place, and to do our inner work, therefore. And Meister Eckhart has a wonderful teaching when he says that those who operate from an inner place and do their inner work, that their work is always good, and it's always large and cosmic in size. But if we only operate from the outer place, from the external self, not the true self or the inner self, he said, you'll never do great work, and it'll never be good work, because that goodness is deep within, and it has to be tapped into. And this is one of the gifts of silence or contemplation. And it is triggered too by the beauty in our lives, by the awe, by the gratitude, what the mystics called via positiva, and what Julian called reverential awe, or what Rabbi Heschel calls radical amazement, that this triggers us and wakes us up. And as Julian says, it charges us to share and to let go, because part of our healing as a species and different communities is that we do have to let go. We cannot cling, we cannot hoard. There's just that's what love means, to learn to share and to learn to let go.
Yeah, so it's like a flow, and things happens and we let go and we let it flow. And new can come in and old can go, and yeah, we can grow. Oh, I'm making a whole poem here.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Oh.
See, wisdom is inspiring you, because Hildegard says there's wisdom in all creative works. So even the poetry comes out when you're onto a journey and a path that's wise. Can't hold it back. Co-creators.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much, Matthew. What's your website so people can...
Well, there's matthewfox.org. Matthew has 2 T's in it. That's my overall website. But I also have something called Daily Meditations with Matthew Fox. So you just go to Daily Meditations with Matthew Fox, and you go online there, and it's free. And I'm offering these meditations each morning. And so that's the second website that people might find useful. We also have we've started an Order of the Sacred Earth. So you can also go to orderofthesacredearth.org and look at that website too, because that's an effort to get people of various religious traditions or none to connect around the important practice of the sacred earth today, and what Mother Earth is telling us today when we're listening deeply about her suffering, and about how we can create pods together, which is local gatherings that work to help heal Mother Earth. So that's the movement I've been involved with young people for the last few years, and it's quite exciting. We're going to be presenting something at the World Parliament of Religions on that, the Order of the Sacred Earth, in a couple of weeks, I think it is. and as well as a cosmic mass, which is an effort to reinvigorate ceremony or liturgy. And again, we've been working on this for a number of years. And so we could be doing a cosmic mass at the World Parliament as well. So no doubt you can find links to those on my webpage or some of these other web pages.
Great.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, and thank you for being here. I loved our conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it too, and thank you for your work, and blessings on it.
Thank you.